part of what I'm going to tell you, based on Greg and I going to City Hall and doing research, is true. Part of what I'm going to tell you is true. That's not a joke. Like, part of the story is true. Part of it, don't know. But part of it's absolutely true, and we have photographs and newspaper clippings to back that up. So I'm not trying to scare you right away. I'm just going to tell you a story about something that took place in this neighborhood at some point. Definitely in this neighborhood at some point. So think what you want. We've done a lot of research on it, and we know some of the stuff is true. We just don't know exactly where in this neighborhood these things occurred. So we'll go from there. So you ready?
Year. No.
Do you guys know what an orphanage is?
Yeah. Oh, yes, we do.
What is an orphanage?
It means something. If you don't have parents, you go to an orphanage.
Right.
Well, sometimes.
So
And they
what-
can blurt out, Annika. I know, right?
So a long time ago in this neighborhood, there absolutely was an orphanage. Some people said it was the Woodfords Orphanage, some people said it was the Arlington Orphanage, but we know for a fact there was an orphanage because we looked it up in the newspapers and we found it. And don't believe it, it's up to you. And what we found is this orphanage was actually one of the better orphanages in the state. It actually won awards because from all accounts, the people that came to check the orphanage out said that the kids were living there were treated really well. And the people that ran the orphanage, they were called the Linscotts. They were a couple that couldn't have children on their own. And what they did year after year is put as much love and devotion into taking care of these kids that didn't have parents as much as they could. And they did this year after year after year. And the kids that lived in that orphanage, when they were running it, were really happy. And these kids, a lot of them eventually ended up moving out of the orphanage when they were 18. Some of them moved away, but a lot of them lived in Portland, and they would come back to visit the orphanage on a regular basis. And the kids were well fed, they were well clothed, they did well in school, and Mr. Linscott would actually read to them at night.
Oh my God.
Which was kind of a unique thing because a lot of them never had that happen to them. And so they knew what love was, they knew what it was to be cared for, and they had like brothers and sisters even though they weren't brothers and sisters. So what happened is the very favorite time that these kids had, the very favorite holiday wasn't Christmas, it was actually Halloween.
Yep.
Now this is before the time that you could go to a place like Walmart or the Halloween shop, wherever, to buy your costumes. And right around like August of each year, Mrs. Linscott would ask the kids what they wanted for a costume. They had to make a choice. And when they would tell her, she would work on those costumes and get them done, handmade, for them for Halloween by the time Halloween came around. She'd stay up till 11 o'clock at night, which back then was a big deal, right? Because only a couple lights in the house. And she would hand sew the costumes, she'd save up money to buy material, and these costumes were awesome. And these kids actually won some Halloween contests back then. Now Halloween's a big deal for a couple of reasons. One, you didn't have television and scary movies, all right? You just had stories. And Halloween was unique because, for the most part, it's the first time you had any kind of connection with ghosts and goblins and stuff like that. So Halloween was unique because kids liked that mysterious aspect of it. You know, you turn on the television today and there's all these horror stories and movies and things. Back then, no movies, no television, kind of just stories or Halloween. Second reason Halloween's a big deal. Back then, there really wasn't a lot of candy. Candy was a luxury. I mean, what I mean is that kids didn't have it all the time. They didn't have cake, sugar was expensive. So Halloween's one of the few times people gave out things like sweets. So as time goes on, these kids know love, they know Halloween, and it becomes a special time for them. And we actually dug up pictures of the Linscotts. And sure enough, in this area, we don't know for sure if it was on this street, the Linscotts lived. Be careful really with the pictures, just your hands on the back, because Greg and I spent about 20 bucks of our own money just to get these reprinted, okay? I mean, it's not a big deal that you touch them, all right? And here are the Linscotts with some of the kids from the orphanage. These are the first 3 that they got. Remember, she never could have children, so it was a big deal. Now, these are some of the kids as they're older, I believe, with the Linscotts, as the orphanage gets bigger, all right? And here's some of the happy kids. See how happy they are? All in one room.
looks different.
Yeah.
Here's he did on another.
Yeah, it might have been when he was older. And again, these are old photographs, but and these are them, and they did their best they could. And you notice they're all eating, right? And what the Linscotts did is the state gives the orphanage X amount of dollars per kid, and the Linscotts would put all that money back into getting the boys clothes and shoes and everything like that. But they also spent their own money on the kids. Mr. Linscott worked a regular job.
If anyone hasn't seen this one.
So these are the Linscotts, and again,
Oh, I didn't see that one.
it was a good time. So how about this? Once you all see him, can you put him on that chair, and we'll move on with the story. What happens as time goes on is the Linscotts, they end up having 60, 70 kids come through there and live happy, happy lives.
I didn't see that one.
But what happens is Mrs. Linscott is older, and as you know, you put it right over there. When you get older, you're susceptible to diseases and things like that. And eventually what happens is she gets a disease called tuberculosis. And it's hard because she loves the kids love her, and she knows that she can really be the only one to take, one of the few people that's so good at taking care of them. Not only that, she knows her husband would have a tough time doing it alone. So she gets tuberculosis, and it strikes sometime in I think it's May of one year. And it hits hard and fast. But she wants those Halloween costumes. So she keeps on sewing and making them. And she asks the kids to tell her what they want to be Halloween early, because she knows she might not make it. She sews and she gets them ready, and she makes that last costume on October, I think it's 27th of the year she dies, and she dies that night. And they go out trick-or-treating, and it's kind of a somber day for them. They're kind of bummed out because they know she left. But she said one of her last things is, "Don't mourn me on Halloween. Have fun." And the thought is that her spirit enjoyed them. So they went out on Halloween, and Mr. Linscott, he loved them a lot. And he did try to keep things together. He tried to run the orphanage on his own. He tried to have people help him. But he was an old guy, and it was too much. And he couldn't do it. So he thought that maybe, because the house brought back so many good memories to him and the kids, that if he sold it to somebody else who was nice, that they would take care of these kids. And he put it up for sale, the orphanage. Now, a couple people looked at it, and finally the people that bought it were a group of people, a couple called the Toothacres. They didn't have kids, and their story was that they couldn't have children. So Mr. Linscott was old, he was tired, and he made the sale. Now deep down in his gut, he may have thought that that was a bad decision, but he made the sale anyway. Now the Toothacres, what we found out through our research is that they were from Skowhegan, and they had made some shady business deals in the past. Mr. Toothaker, he had been accused of crimes. His name was Boyd Toothaker. And Mrs. Toothaker, rumor was she wasn't a very nice person, we don't know for sure. But they took over the orphanage, and again, as time went on, we found out they did a couple of things different than the Linscotts. You know how all the money, you have, let's say, 10 kids in an orphanage, you get $100 for each kid each month? Well, that's supposed to go for the kids. Their clothing, medicine, heat, blankets, food. The Toothacres didn't do the same thing as the Linscotts. They took that money for themselves. They bought jewelry, they drank a lot of alcohol, they bought nice clothes for themselves, and they weren't very nice to the kids. And a lot of the kids ended up getting frustrated at this and complaining. But the Toothacres knew that if they could scare them into not talking, they'd be able to run the orphanage and take that money and use it for themselves. And again, we know they took over the orphanage. Rumor has it, from various newspaper accounts, that the Toothacres did real bad things to the kids. Like, they hit them. They had punishments that were unique punishments, like with leather belts. If you really got out of line, they used a pretty big hammer on the fingernails. And what they thought is if they broke just one finger of a kid that was complaining, the state would shut them down because they could say it was an accident, but that kid would never talk about the fact that they were being hit, not given enough food, abused, and stuff like that. And remember I told you that it was a favorite time, and all these costumes have to be handmade. So, sure enough, we looked, and at City Hall, we found some of these from, you know what, I'm going to give them all to you guys to pass that way, and what I want is, I'd like them to end up there, so you guys take a couple minutes.
I don't know.
And these are costumes made by Mrs. Linscott. And Mrs. Linscott, again, I will tell you the one day that the Toothacres also agreed to let the kids go outside, the only day they let them go out at night was Halloween. You know, one of the things Greg and I said when we looked at these pictures, you can kind of see the cruelty and the coldness in their eyes. And I think you will. I think you will.
So,
Now, one of the things the Toothacres did, they took in more kids than they normally have, and they crowded them into rooms a lot. And again, when the kids complained, they got less food, they got locked in closets, they had parts of their fingers broken, and you know, it was just a really, really sad time. Now I gotta tell you, remember I told you that when this was a good orphanage, some of the people that left moved into the community and they stayed and they came back and visited? Well, some of those people came back and visited the orphanage. They would come back and visit when the Toothacres were here. And the Toothacres would reluctantly let them in. And they noticed that the kids weren't smiling. They looked cold and skinny. They were grumpy. And they asked them, "What's wrong? Why are you sad? Why did you get the black eye? Why is your finger bandaged?" The kids wouldn't say anything. They wouldn't say anything. And these people, they were frustrated, these former orphans that lived here during good times. So they tried to shut the place down. They tried to go to City Hall and the police and say, "We know something's wrong. We know something's wrong." But the police said, "You know what, we get those complaints about that orphanage, and every time we interview the kids, they don't say anything. We got no proof that these kids are being abused. We got nothing. And if we got nothing, we can't shut the orphanage down." As time goes on, a couple of the kids are lucky enough to escape. They take off. Now I gotta tell you, if they got caught when they took off, they got the hammer, right? You're gonna see what the hammer is. They got the hammer. And the hammer is not pleasant. But a lot of them got away, and that's because the Toothacres are so mean. Now the Toothacres were really, really mean, and one of the things that one of the former orphans who spent all his life here, and he loved the Linscotts, told himself is that it's going to be my duty to find a way to shut this place down because it used to be a happy place. And it's my home, and I'm not going to let these people, the Toothacres, ruin it. Well, he'd follow them around. And now the Toothacres were desperate for money because some kids had left the orphanage. And every time a kid leaves the orphanage, the state gives you less money. They needed to find a way to get more kids in the orphanage. And people stopped dropping kids off at the orphanage, their orphanage. So they devised a plan. Mr. Toothacre actually, and Mrs. Toothacre, before they were in the orphanage business, one of the things he did is he worked in a circus. He was a master of disguise. He could make himself look like a woman, a man, a child, an older person. But one of the things he did for Ringling Brothers, he actually was a clown. And what he did, now this is in the 1800s, he would go to circuses and fairs like the Cumberland Fair. You think it's big now? A while back, the Cumberland Fair would have 70, 80,000 people there one day. They'd all walk or ride by horseback. I mean, it was the one time you got to do something outside of just working. People would take their children, and it's known that during this period of time, it's one of the first times parents would let their kids wander. Because a fair, it's like they thought was a pretty safe place. There were rides and games. There were magicians. There was food that was unique. There were animals, different people from different parts of the state. And what happened was, this man that left the orphanage and wanted to shut it down because the Toothacres took over, he followed the Toothacres. Mr. Toothacre followed him around. He followed him to a circus one day that was visiting Portland. He walks and he follows him and he sees him go behind a tent and he waits. Mr. Toothacre comes out, he's dressed like a clown. Not unusual for a circus, right? Circuses have clowns. But he noticed his costume was different. The face of the clown was a little different than all the others. And he had a kind of a funny colored hairdo. It was like all multicolored. So this good orphan who was now an adult that wanted to save the other orphans followed Mr. Toothaker around and said, "What is he doing? Why is he at the circus?" Well, Mr. Toothaker, he sees, watches this couple and their boy. And he watches him. And Mr. Toothaker could tell that the boy wants to leave and go out on his own. A lot like you guys sometimes want to go out on your own. You know, you want to go someplace alone. You might be at the mall. You might want to walk around alone. Parents might say no. Well, this kid was getting in an argument with his parents, and finally, the parents said, "Fine, you can go out on your own. Be back at noon. I'll be back in an hour." Well, the kid leaves, and Mr. Toothaker, disguised as a clown, follows him. And then following Mr. Toothaker is that person, right? I can't quite remember his name. I think it's John. He follows him, the person that used to be in the orphanage when it was good and is now an adult. And he follows Mr. Toothaker around a bend, and he sees him giving this boy who just got let out to walk around the fair, the circus for the first time, a piece of cotton candy, an apple, candy apple. And he pays for him to go on a ride, which is a big deal. This kid's poor, he has nothing. Kid goes on the ride. Of course, he thinks Mr. Toothaker's a clown, a friendly clown, working for the circus, right? You can trust him. Next thing you know, he pays for another ride, and he takes him into a fun house. And this kid has got his arm around Mr. Toothaker, thinks he's a good guy. And then all of a sudden, Mr. Toothaker, John hears him say this, "Follow me, I want to show you my horse." It's not a lie. Mr. Toothaker got there by riding a horse and buggy. Well, when John turns the corner, Mr. Toothaker has got the kid tied and wrapped up. Because John lost him in the crowd. But he found him where Mr. Toothaker parked his horse and buggy. And he has his sack. And he throws the sack into the horse and buggy and takes off. And John can't catch him. He can't catch him. He tries, but he can't. And what he realizes is that Mr. Toothaker's been doing this for a while. He goes to fairs. He goes to circuses and carnivals and festivals. And he dresses as a magician or a clown or as an old man. And kids disappear. And you know what we found? Where Mr. Toothaker lived, there was reports of missing kids. It just happened. Now, I happen to have some pictures of the orphanage when the Toothakers took it over. Now, the orphanage was huge, and I will tell you this. I don't know where it was, but I know that this house was built with a blueprint. That means the design, right, what it's shaped like, was the exact same shape, down to the room, of a wing of the orphanage. So it wasn't as big. Here's a picture of the kids when the Toothakers lived there.
I know, but I don't know.
Now, I also told you that Mr. Toothaker was a master of disguise. And he was a master of disguise. You got to remember, back then, you had to have a craft or a trade. And people had a lot of free time when they weren't working because there wasn't really radio or television. And these are pictures of him in various disguises. And I believe also a picture, the police tried to pick out this picture. They thought he was one of these clowns in the Ringlings Brothers Circus, but they couldn't confirm it because they searched for him for a while. You guys can take a look at these. John calls a meeting of some of the former orphans. And he says, "Listen, the police won't do anything. I've written the governor, the Department of Human Services. All of them say without proof the orphanage stays open. There's nothing we can do." But he says, "I think there is something we can do. And we might have to break the law to do it." But the other people he talks to say, "John, those people don't let the kids out of their sight. They're there every night. They can't go out. They can't play. They stay inside. How are we going to get into that orphanage to do anything?" And John says, "You know what? There's one night they let them out. One night only. And it's Halloween. And on that night, if we can get into that orphanage, and we can maybe get in there and start some kind of fire to condemn it, then we can maybe get the kids to other orphanages. Or maybe some of us can adopt them because we know we can do a better job than those Toothakers, man. They're mean. because those other orphans he talked to had been to visit, and they could sense something was wrong. That night, that Halloween night when all the kids are out, and their only job that night is to leave and bring back Mr. and Mrs. Toothaker candy. Not for themselves, just for them. And they have to use some of the older costumes they had. John sneaks in. John's goal, start a small fire. He starts a fire, and things go bad. Really bad. Now the only people in the house that night are the Toothakers. And the house not only burns down, not only the massive orphanage is probably 3 times the size of this house, but the neighborhood catches on fire. You guys have to understand, this is during a period of time when not everybody had a telephone. So by the time the fire department found out about the fire, it had been going on for an hour. By the time they got here, with all their equipment, and by the time they actually got water, which they may have had to get from like a local pond that may have existed, you're talking 2 or 3 hours. And there wasn't time. There wasn't time to save the orphanage. But the part of John's plan to get the kids placed to another orphanage,
Worked.
that worked. John never meant to hurt anybody. But they never ever found the Toothakers. You would think they would have come forward and gotten insurance money, right? Started another orphanage. As time goes on, the police talk to some of these kids that leave the orphanage, and they realize how bad the Toothakers have been, so they look for them for 10 years and they don't find them. It's weird, they don't even rebuild the neighborhood for a while. No money to do so. And what happens is when they do rebuild the neighborhood, it's like 20 years later, 15 years later, some people that rebuilt used to live in the neighborhood and they remember the Halloween party. They remember how the good times, right, when the Linscotts owned it. And so they finished building in like September, and their first big like neighborhood get-together is Halloween. And that first Halloween might have been 1938. I can't remember the date. Greg might remember the date.
It was right around that time.
Yeah. This girl that lived on one side of Arlington Street, that might have been when the first Arlington Street came up, I don't know. Well, she goes across the street and asks her parents before she goes, I'm going, trick-or-treating. The parents think it's safe because it's Halloween, it's a neighborhood party, everybody knows everybody. And there's like 50 people in the street. Families are bigger back then. So a house like that one across the street has probably 10 people in it. 2 parents, 8 kids. This house, 5 or 6. So they never see this girl again. And they ask everybody in the neighborhood, and the one thing people keep on saying is, I saw her talking to a clown. But you know what? They ask around, which one of you adults was a clown? No one. No one says anything. And that makes the papers. So eventually what happens to this home, before it becomes a home that people live in, it's a rooming house, or what they would call a hotel. And weird things happen in the hotel. Now some people suspect that the weird things happen because the hotel is built on top of where the old orphanage was. We couldn't prove that. Greg and I looked through records, we looked at old neighborhoods, we couldn't find it. What we do know is that there's evidence of a fire and an orphanage, and the people named both the Toothakers and the Linscotts. I'll actually show you a couple more things. These are pictures of the last Halloween. The kids don't look quite as happy. Those are their old costumes. And here's some pictures of the fire that gets out of hand. There's not as much built up stuff. And lastly, I have a picture that it took us probably 7 hours. We had to go to the Portland Press Herald, which luckily let us into their archives. And Greg paid for this. This is like, it probably cost $30 to do. These are pictures of old newspapers. All right? And this is a summary of the fire. And at this point, by the time the fire occurred, John had gone to the press and a reporter believed him. This place becomes a hotel, and the owners of the hotel, although they never shut the hotel down, they said that people saw stuff in the hotel. Glimpses of things. A glimpse of a ghost. A glimpse of a child. A glimpse of a child who was in pain. Help me. Well, it might be this. It might be that the souls of the children come back in mourning. There's no evidence they killed anybody. No evidence at all. If there was evidence of that, they would have shut it down. All I can say is that the Toothacres were mean, the Lynn Scotts were good, and someplace in this neighborhood, this general area, there was an orphanage and there was a fire. And for the most part, what happened in this home was that people that owned it in the 1920s and 30s said weird stuff happened. Now that could be them being paranoid, right? The whole idea of ghosts and stuff like that is something that it can be your imagination, or not. I don't know. But I know that this part that I've told you thus far has been right on the money. So what I wanted to do was take you. Did I tell you that this house was built with the same blueprint? So what I mean by the same blueprint is the rooms to the inch are the same as a wing of the orphanage. Now through our research, what we found is that there are several rooms where some not so nice stuff happened. All right, and we know this because we've heard from the interviews and the testimonies of John. We couldn't print. Remember I told you how much it cost to print this? We couldn't afford to print the other stuff. John and some of the orphans that left, after a couple of years, they felt safe. They felt safe from the Toothacres. They told their stories. And their stories had to do with how the Toothacres mistreated them. And, the stuff that the Toothacres did wasn't nice. They didn't kill them, right? But they did bad stuff. And so what I wanted to do next was to take you guys on a tour of the exact blueprint of...
Oh, dang it.
What
Sorry.
rooms haunted?
What?
What rooms were haunted?
Well, I'm not going to tell you now. I want to show you the rooms that I'm talking about. All right? Walk slowly up the stairs. Now, do you guys see how these stairs are curved?
Yeah.
There's an old rumor that some of the people that eventually talked to the police, what they said was that the Toothacres, Boyd was worse. When he was mad at you, if he thought you were going to complain to warn you, he'd push you down the stairs. Now, if he was really thinking you were going to complain,
Look at the
he'd
pictures.
start here.
Oh, God. No.
But if he
Stop it!
thought that you just might complain, he'd go to the middle. And again, these are built exactly to spec because they didn't have to pay for new blueprints. That's why they built the house exactly the same as before. On occasion, when this was a hotel, people said they thought they saw people, small people, tumbling down the stairs, but we have no proof of that.
The pictures are the creepiest.
Now, I got a couple of things here. You see these? See what these are? You guys can hold them, they're no big deal.
What are they?
We got those,
Is that a
in
hammer?
essence,
Holy crap, that's a hammer.
out of
The leather
a couple of things out of the police evidence room. Remember I said the police couldn't prove anything? Well, after the fire, what we found is that one of the orphans came back and dug through the rubble and he found some things. This is one of the things he found.
Oh. What's he talking about?
No, we can't prove it. But supposedly, Mr. Toothacre, you want to feel how heavy it is?
Yeah. No, thank you.
Mr. Toothacre used that to intimidate them. Now, if again,
I want to feel it.
he thought you were going to talk, or if he thought
No,
that
Thank you.
if
I'm
he
good.
thought that you were gonna, he'd do that near your finger, or if you're really bad, the front part of your finger. Again, if you break a finger, all you can tell the police is that what he would tell the police is that he fell down on his own, he bumped into a wall, and the kids would never talk. And so what he would do is he'd use this as a form of intimidation, because once you saw that happen, right?
Don't be like it or I'm killing you.
What would happen is that
Not
now another thing he would do is that he would spank them with a belt, not his hand.
I hate you.
And, you know, needless to say, a belt like this, although it's turn of the century, right? It can hurt. So Mr. Toothaker, now, the reason I gave you these is Mr. Toothaker was not a very nice person. And instead of boxing people's ears in with his hands, he'd do it like that. Alright? He'd do it like that. By the way, he got these, we found out through our research that when he was a clown, he was a juggling clown, and these are actually juggling pins. And they're turn of the century, probably over 100 years old. We don't know if these were the ones, but we do know this, is that this is what he used according to some of those orphans. And
Ooh, look at that.
now, I have to tell you that the room that I want to go in next is a room that's modeled after the room the Toothacres slept in.
Oh,
Mrs. Toothaker, all right, and Mr. Toothaker told the kids never go in there. And the few kids that went in there that were caught, in essence, they came back, but they would never talk. They would never speak.
About it or like?
They'd never speak, period. They'd never speak, period.
Alina, I want to speak.
You guys know what the word portal means?
No. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
What is it?
to God,
It's like a doorway to another dimension.
A door. Now, this is what, when this was a hotel in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. Some people claim
We're in the back.
that room was a portal to Mrs. Toothaker's soul or spirit, whatever.
Okay, that's really creepy.
Alright,
And that,
you're freaking me out, dude.
well, I want to show you what I mean.
Skip this room.
There's plenty of light, and there's nothing to be afraid of. If you look, now this is what a portal supposedly happens with a portal. If you look in the corners of a mirror,
Hey, it's Kara.
for 30 seconds you might, and listen, for 30 seconds straight, and then we can leave. It's no big deal. I want you to look in and see if you can see anything. I need everyone
It
to
only
look.
works if everyone looks into
If
the
you
mirror.
don't look,
Look at that corner.
I need you closer. I need everybody closer.
It's just
Spread out.
gonna be a
The
flashlight.
corner. For 30 seconds I'm going to count.
Guys,
Alright,
push me.
slowly. Alright, we'll give you room.
1, 2,
I'm not trying to
3.
scare you.
Ready?
Look in the
Ready?
corner
Flash
of the
light.
mirror.
Woo! It's from the
Can you
camera.
look in the corner for 30 seconds?
Like
30 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4. So one of the things that the Toothacres did, all right, was that when you were bad, they put you in a tub of ice. Now the tub of ice thing, Mr. Toothache would hold you, and Mrs. Toothache would tell you what you did wrong, and they'd hold you there, and they'd hold you until they thought you couldn't take it anymore, and they'd take you out. Almost every orphan that admitted to being here and talking about the Toothacres said everybody went through the tub of ice. Everybody. It was like the one way they got you to believe that they meant business. And it was just something we wanted to show you. Now, this obviously is not a turn of the century tub, and this obviously isn't the real thing, but this built to spec. This was the same place that the bathroom would have been in the old wing of the old orphanage. Let's come in to this room and just relax.
Someone
right?
needs to be in front for You guys are going for it. No, you.
There's one.
You guys just say no.
There was one.
Yeah.
You might be right.
Yes.
There's one thing that Mrs. Toothaker hated, and that was complaining. And remember I told you they used to be able to limit the complaining, right? It was pretty easy to limit the complaining because you had the tub, you had the hammer, you had the two juggling things, and you had the belt.
And the hand. Oh, yeah, you already said that.
So most of the kids,
closet.
and plus they threw you down the stairs.
Oh, yeah.
Now, Mrs. Toothaker, there was one kid that had the guts to complain no matter what. His name was Billy.
Oh, really?
And actually,
Billy!
and it's weird thing is that Billy took all that stuff. He was a tough kid. And he kept on complaining. How come you don't give us any food? I'm eventually going to tell. How come you don't give us nice clothes? Billy was there with his sister, so he complained partially because of his sister. How come my sister's cold all the time? How come she cries? How come you don't read his stories? And they could not beat Billy into submission. He was too tough. And Mrs. Toothaker said, I wish we could shut his mouth up for good. And all of a sudden, a light went on in her head. We can. And we can say it was just an accident. Now, Mrs. Toothaker used to work as a seamstress. Do you know what that means?
No.
Oh my
Yeah.
God.
You
Yeah.
You sew.
So his mouth shut.
So Mrs. Toothaker says, you know what we're going to do? We'll just do it for a little while, and then we'll patch him up. Because I used to be a nurse too, and that's no problem. And who's going to believe him? A kid, a runaway, who was a thief, because Billy was a thief. He actually got brought to the orphanage from the police. Who's going to believe him? We're gonna one night, we're gonna knock him out. We're gonna sew his mouth shut. He's gonna wake up, and we're gonna say, hey, you think this is the worst it's gonna get? No. And so she actually did that to him. Billy lived, and eventually did testify to the police. This was a guest room, more of a place where people would sit and read when this was a hotel. So there was a couple of bedrooms over there. And it's weird, because when this was a hotel, this is one of the complaints that people had. And it was only during certain times of the year. She basically said that during certain times of the year, a boy would come around and say stuff. And it was
I don't want to
only,
hear screaming.
it was only around Halloween. Only around Halloween.
Daddy.
That Billy, only around. The foundation is not something that's new. The foundation of this house is from the 1880s. They dug out stuff after the fire. They didn't make a new foundation. They built on top of the old one. You can tell when you see it. So the last thing I will tell you, when they dug out from the fire, they found some, not a lot, some human bones. They could never verify who the bones belonged to. They found some. So when they found the bones was about right around the time that they built the house. And about a year after they built the house, the person disappears during that first Halloween. So, well, I don't know, honey, but listen, if I take you down there, one thing I will tell you.
Oh no.
Supposedly besides mirrors,
Okay.
supposedly besides mirrors, another thing that brings back things from the past are the actual items from the past. Turn of the century things, clothes, toys, whatever it might be. So listen, I want you guys to relax. The scary part's done. I will take you down there and I'll show you A, where the bones are found, and where the turn of the century toys are found, and we can take a look at them. It's actually pretty cool to see them.
Cool.
All right.
Yeah, it was very Let Elena go in front. She doesn't want. She doesn't like. Ooh, it smells. Oh, I love this smell. I know, me too, right? Ooh, it smells good. Oh, look, figure skates. Did you spray paint the steps so we could see? I'm scared.
See 'em? Those are all authentic, you can tell, turn of the century toys. Do you see them?
Wait, Ella.
You guys can pick them up. It's okay. What are the toys that are there?
Scary.
Do you see them? There's an old book, blocks, an old bow and arrow.
Standing over there. Maybe we should get over there.
Where's my dad?
You guys see the puppet?
Where?
What else is there, please?
Cigar.
There's a pipe.
What's
What this? This one? This. This thing?
Don't touch that. Just put that down. Let me see that.
Holy shit.
Move over. Get out of my way for a minute, please. No, that.
It's a car.
No, you